Welcome to this podcast, Holistic Creators, where we share our unique and universal stories about shaping the future for the 4 Ps: people, planet, purpose, and profit. My name is Swanette Kuntze. I'm a mental coach and your host of this show. My intention for this show is to inspire you on your path to a holistic future. So welcome. Welcome to my podcast, Holistic Creators. My name is Swanette and I'm your host. Today I have a special guest. His name is Cheyne Towers. He's co-founder of the Dialogue of Self-Liberation. So welcome to my show.
Thank you very much, Swanette. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, you have a very interesting topic, and I think everybody, really everybody who is listening to this has the same problem once in his life or even very often about self-talk. What are people speaking to themselves? Can you start a little bit telling us what is this all about?
Thank you. For the last 20 years, I've been working as a therapist based in London. I was trained as a hypnotherapist as a personal student of a gentleman whose name was Vernon C F Bell. And Vernon was my friend first and foremost, and he was famously known as the founding father of the British karate movement in 1957. And we shared an interest in martial arts and also what's sometimes referred to as the perennial wisdom. It's the archetypes and themes which flow through all of the different religions and spiritual traditions that unite them, really. And so we were friends, but he was also a very blunt man and very cheeky. And one day I was visiting him and he asked me a question: do I or do I not wish to study hypnotherapy with him? You see, he was also a founder member of the British Association of Therapeutic Hypnotists in 1951. It's the oldest regulatory body for hypnotherapy in the United Kingdom. And he had a wealth of experience in helping people for pretty much most of his adult life. And so when he asked me that question, do I or do I not wish to study with him, he said, only a yes or no will do. I never wanted to become a therapist. The thought never even entered my head, not for a single moment. But then over the next few hours, I realized that I couldn't give him a clear reason why I would say no. And I realized that every reason I was trying to come up with why I was going to say no was a very poor reason. And I realized I respected him too much to give him a poor reason. And that's the only reason I said yes. And then I studied with him for the last 4 years of his life. And during that time, he took me through a process. And in this process, he helped me to identify the things I'd been saying to myself about myself, the unhelpful stories I'd picked up along the way, unhelpful beliefs about myself, and the habit of being very spiteful toward myself, which I'd been doing completely unconsciously for about 20 years of my life because of things I'd experienced in my past. And he helped me to identify those things and then taught me how to let go of the habit of repeating those unhelpful statements about myself, and how to stop communicating toward myself in self-defeating or self-abusive ways. And since his passing, I've been working with so many people over the last 20 years, taking them through the very same process that he took me through. And I've seen really wonderful, miraculous transformations in people who've come to initially see me in various states of broken, sometimes very, very broken. I've worked with people over the years who've been, many people, unfortunately, sadly, who've been raped or sexually abused or in violent, abusive relationships, or people who've been attacked and have traumas, or people in accidents and things like this. You see, the problems persist, our problems persist because we communicate toward ourselves about our past as if it were the present or the future. But we do this unconsciously. And I'd like to get into some more detail about this maybe as we continue to speak. But yeah, essentially, that's the work that I've been doing for the last 20 years, is helping people to transform how they speak to themselves or how they communicate toward themselves about themselves, so that they understand how to not drag their past experiences into the present moment in their self-communications, or how not to project them into their future in their imagination, with the expectation or the assumption that those patterns and beliefs and experiences are just going to continue.
Yeah, I totally hear you. So for me, it's kind of the same. I have also clients that come with these kind of blocking beliefs, and also like having this idea about themselves, and yeah, speaking very badly about themselves, something that they would never say to someone else, but they speak this way to themselves.
That's very common, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So to understand, how do these beliefs and self-talks start? So what is the origin of this very often? You said it can be traumas, but sometimes it's also like already in the childhood.
Absolutely.
So can you give us a little bit of an overview what you have figured out about that?
Well, yeah, I think that in terms of, I don't personally like the term hypnotherapy or hypnotherapist for the work I do. I describe what I do is I help people to identify unhelpful patterns or self-abusive patterns of internal dialogue and the associated other kinds of self-communication that we engage in, like repeated imagination of things, replaying old events, and then I help them to let go of the habit of repeating them. And with regards to why I don't like the term hypnotherapy or hypnotherapist, is because people have all kinds of strange ideas about what that is. And usually they're wrong. They think very often that if a person goes to a hypnotherapist, it's because they don't really know what else to do about their problems and situations, or abusive habits or whatever, or self-destructive tendencies. And they think that the therapist is going to do something to them, and then they'll leave and they'll be fine. And they don't realize that if they really want to fundamentally transform their experience, they need to work on themselves as well. It's a process. So the methodology that I refer to, that I work with, is an understanding really of a principle and certain specifics about language that I was taught by my teacher, Vernon. It requires that we utilize the conscious analytical mind as well, the rational mind, if you like, in a cognitive way, so that we recognize what we've been saying to ourselves first and foremost. So everything in life, all hypnosis is for the purpose of therapy, is the use of suggestion to create a positive change and transformational outcome in the individual's perceptions of themselves and the life they're living, and how they respond to things, situations, other people. But it could be said that everything from the moment where we draw our first breath suggests to us impressions of the world around us. So from the moment we're born, we may hear certain sounds that are soothing, but if you're born into a different environment, the sounds you hear when you're born could be very harsh and confusing. We may be born to parents who have challenges, drug or alcohol or violent surroundings. And then as the child grows up, they associate certain things with, that makes me feel good, that makes me feel fearful, this makes me angry. And we become conditioned by these things. Our outer world suggests to us certain impressions, and we pick up certain habits and beliefs. It's unfortunate that sometimes, in some cases, I've had people come to see me who've been born to parents who have been jealous of them, jealous of their attributes, maybe their beauty as a child, and would be nothing but spiteful to their own child, to the point where the child grows up believing that they're ugly and develops body dysmorphia as a result. Every time they'd look at themselves in the mirror, they would see ugly, and yet they're beautiful, or very obviously beautiful. So we pick up beliefs about ourselves along the way. I would say the most common theme of negative, self-defeating, and really self-abusive self-talk of all of the people I've worked with over the years is the statement, I'm not good enough. And it doesn't matter how successful a person may have become in their work life. And I have clients who have become very, very successful, very wealthy, in fact, in their particular chosen fields. And yet, on the inside, have never really addressed the inner work, taking an honest, courageous look at themselves, the patterns and the habits and the unhelpful beliefs that they picked up about themselves, because they recognize the value in doing so, and they're prepared to do the work on themselves. So we all pick up these habits. Well, that belief, I'm not good enough, it could have come from, in my case, when I was a child, probably about 8, 9, 10 years, maybe about 8 or 9 or 10. I had a teacher at school. I was in the top class for mathematics. But my teacher at the time really couldn't stand me. So she used to call me Snail. And she used to shout and scream at me, Snail, you're stupid. And I would get terribly embarrassed. My ears would go red. I'd start to sweat. And the whole class would be laughing at me. And this became a habit that she got into. It was a pattern, and it terrified me. So she eventually, her reactions, her words, her spiteful words, caused me to believe that I couldn't do it, that I was useless and stupid when it came to maths. So I carried that belief, and it developed into almost like a numerical dyslexia. So even the simplest of adding up or subtraction or division, I couldn't work it out. It was like a wall would just descend, and I just couldn't understand where to go or what to do. And I carried that belief for a very, very long time. And it could have been the case that a person was in a relationship where they were told that they were useless or something, or whatever, or ugly or stupid or no good at this or that. And then they carry that belief around with them for many years. I did that for 20 years in a variety of ways, totally unconsciously, replaying spiteful things in my imagination that have been said to me or done to me by other people, replaying those memories or variations on those themes, imagining if only I would have said this, if only I hadn't have done that, if only I'd have left sooner, before things got really bad. And but of course we can't change what's happened to us. We imagine all kinds of things in the future in our imagination. We imagine a future in which we continue to feel rubbish about ourselves. But what we don't realize is every time we do this, we're communicating to ourselves about that future in such a way, totally unconsciously, that all it serves to do is reinforce those unhelpful beliefs we've picked up about ourselves along the way. And it happens in very sneaky ways through little words like am, or is, or this, or my. So let me just describe what I mean. For instance, every time we say I am is immediate. Am is now, it's here, it's happening. But what if we are talking about how for the last week we've been feeling really angry because somebody said something to us that was really disrespectful or hurtful or spiteful or dismissive, and we haven't been able to let go of it? Every time we say I am angry, we drag it again into the now, and we cause it to have energy in the present moment again. When we say, I'm always angry, I can't let go of this anger. Now, this is immediate. If I hold this here and I say this, I'm holding something in my hand and it's right close to me, this. But if I put it over there and I say that, it's suddenly, there's a perceptual distance. And if we're talking about old hurts and traumas, it's very important that we learn the skill of no longer communicating about those traumas as if they're here now, in this moment, or as if they're always going to be there. So a very common theme, a very common question that people would ask of themselves is, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? That is a sneaky kind of self-suggestion, negative self-suggestion, because if we ask ourselves the question, what's wrong with me? It implies we already believe there is something wrong with us. Yeah. Why does it always happen to me? Implies I already believe it always happens to me. Why can't I ever manage to? Implies no matter what I try, it's never going to work. And I already believe that it's never going to work. But we say these things to ourselves totally unconsciously in such a way, as you rightly said, Swanette, we would never dream of talking to another person like that. I often use this as a metaphor when working with people. I say, if you imagine, do you have any young people, like children who you're really close to, who you love very much? Do you have your own kids, or, you know, kids that are relatives or whatever? And you imagine that child who you love, and imagine seeing an adult wagging the finger at them saying, you're useless, you're never going to do any good in life, you're ugly, you're really ugly, everyone thinks you're ugly, you're never going to achieve anything in life because you're a failure. You'd be outraged. You'd be right in the middle there saying, how dare you, you know? And yet we've been conditioned by society to somehow accept the notion that it's okay for us to communicate like that toward ourselves. It's such a crime, it's so wrong, but it's what we refer to, when I say we, myself and the co-founder of the Dialogue of Self-Liberation, which is the name I give to this work, developing the Dialogue of Self-Liberation, a way of communicating toward ourselves in such a way that it frees us rather than constricts or confines our notions about ourselves or our beliefs about ourselves. How can we possibly let go of something if we're not even aware we're carrying it? So when we become aware of the habits and patterns that we've been carrying that really are just really unhelpful, then we have an opportunity to let them go.
So it's about becoming aware of the loops people are going through, like situations that show up again and again, to understand, oh, there's something in our subconscious mind that is not helpful, and to bring it then with your work to awareness.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so we first of all have to bring it to the awareness, because otherwise it remains, we're unaware of it, it's hidden. And how can we possibly let go of something if we're not even aware that we're carrying it? So that's the rational part of the work, the analytical aspect of the work. And that comes first. We first have to identify the things that don't make sense to carry forward if we want to feel free, and no longer drag the past into the now or project it into the future in a negative way. But then the next aspect of the work is transformational aspect of the work, practically, is to harness the creative power of the imagination, so that we train the mind so that it serves us rather than us being a slave to thinking the worst.
How does this work? So how are you doing this?
Well, this becomes more recognizable hypnotherapeutic approach. So I tend to refer to this aspect of the work as guided visualization rather than hypnotherapy, whilst it is hypnotherapeutic. the way that I approach this is I basically guide the person through, like telling a person a story, really. If we were a child, or even as an adult, listening to someone tell us a story, we would, in our imaginations, place ourselves in that story and kind of be in it. So in a similar manner, if a person's been through an upsetting experience in their past, a traumatic experience, no matter what that experience may have been, no matter how traumatic, I help them to view the memory, but from a totally different perspective, so that they do something completely different with that memory, so that the memory doesn't tell them how they should think or what they should believe or how they should feel or how they should react. Instead, by viewing it through a different lens and creatively utilizing their imagination, they turn that memory into something very different where they gain control over it, rather than just replay and feel a victim of that memory and all of the associated thoughts or feelings that arose when that thing happened in their past.
So you bring them into a kind of a meta position where they're observing the situation and like interpreting it new, or becoming creating a different kind of understanding about that? Is it more?
Yes, but doing all kinds of sometimes very strange and unusual things with how they choose to view that memory and what happens to the image of that memory, so that they drain the mental and emotional magnetism from the memory, so that the memory has no power to drain them back into that old way, to drag them back into that old way of thinking, or to drag them into those old feelings any longer. Yeah, so that can be done with great humor, actually, and humor is a real powerful weapon when it's utilized in this way.
How can they disconnect from like what was the situation? And then, of course, with every situation, as we interpreted it, we have like our body reactions, we have our emotions with that. How do you disconnect them? Okay, you said with humor, but can you give us a little bit more details for people that don't understand that yet?
Yes, there are various different ways. By removal of the associations, or creating alternate associations. So behavioral replacement. So having, for instance, a place through which, a process through which the person goes to a particular place, first and foremost, and they establish that place as a comfortable place, a really, really comfortable place, which is full of associations that to that individual relate to personal healing, something which is absolutely safe and clear, maybe sacred to them. Something which could represent that sacred nature, that sacred quality or feeling. And they establish that place and they settle themselves into that place first and foremost. And then from that place, they begin to review that memory. And they view it through whichever lens they choose to view it through. So rather than, if you imagine, I use a lot of metaphor and symbolism in this work. So if, you know, we've all sometimes tried on someone else's glasses and you try them on, it's like, God, I can't see a thing. It's really blurry. Well, very often what we'd end up doing is, if we've been through a traumatic experience, we would become habitually used to viewing that memory through the this is all too much for me, I can't cope lens. Yeah, we put those kind of glasses on, and then whatever we look through, it's like, oh, it's too much, I can't cope. It's overwhelming. Yeah, it's bringing it all back, and I feel traumatized again, because we're looking at it from the same viewpoint as we were back then. As opposed to then, if you've been used to looking through those lenses, the blurry lens, and then someone says, hang on, you've got the wrong glasses on there. Why don't you try these ones on? And you suddenly put these ones on, and it's like, oh my God, these actually work. I can see clearly now. So then we choose to view that memory through a very different lens. And then we begin to employ the active, creative imagination to alter what happens to that memory. How it looks, how it sounds, how it feels, how it tastes, really employing the senses. And by removal of the old way of thinking, the detaching of that old way of thinking, those old ways of feeling from the memory, removing it, and sometimes removing it several layers back, and then viewing it from this higher perspective or more distanced perspective. Again, anything which creates a perceptual distancing between who we are and where we are now and how we're feeling now and what we're doing with our mind and our imagination and how we were back then, helps the person to distance themselves from those old emotions and the old unhelpful beliefs they picked up along the way about themselves. And this, I've seen remarkable transformations in the people who've worked in this way, who've been through just really awful things, severe trauma. And when the person realizes that what defines who we are is not what we've been through in our past, but what we choose to do with those experiences. How do we process the experiences we've been through? And this is the choice. It's absolutely a choice. We can choose to remain what we believe to be a victim of our past. Or we choose to look at those experiences in a courageous way and think, okay, yes, that was really awful. What can I learn from that experience? How can I take those memories, do something very different with how I choose to perceive the memories from now? What do I do with this differently? What can I do with it differently? So that those memories become perfect examples, like a springboard for me. Perfect examples of what's no longer acceptable, how not to be, what not to believe about myself, what not to be saying to myself about myself, how not to react anymore, how not to treat myself any longer, how not to treat others, maybe, if we've treated others in ways that we have regret for. And a major part of this work is the development of self-forgiveness and self-compassion, because if we don't really grant ourselves permission to forgive ourselves for not having known better how to deal with those things in the past at that time, then what we end up doing is we just carry on beating ourselves up for longer, feeling guilty or full of shame or regret. And that stuff doesn't help us to make progress. So a very good friend of mine once said, forgiveness frees the soul of the forgiver. And I believe this to be true. So if we're thinking in terms of self-forgiveness, by forgiving ourselves for not having known better how to deal with things in the past, it frees our own soul. It gives us an opportunity to learn from those experiences. And it gives meaning to the very fact that we had those kind of experiences, because they're great life lessons, sometimes very harsh, very traumatic and troublesome, but also incredibly powerful when we learn how to take those experiences as examples of what's no longer acceptable, how not to be anymore, how not to treat ourselves, and what not to be saying to ourselves in our minds about ourselves.
Yeah, so I hear this is really deep work, and I see so many people being kind of trapped in situations where they go in loops again and again and again. And even though sometimes they understand, they already have this awareness, they are not able to overcome these, the connection between the situation and the emotions, for example. They are not able to disconnect from the past and having this as a learning process. Understanding often sometimes it's really because they have this learning process. They know that they have kind of a soul path they have to follow to help others who have been in the same situation. But
very true.
Yeah, so often it is really like having this situations, understanding about why have they been through that, then going into what you said, going into forgiveness about that, because of course we can always handle the best we can. So otherwise we would do different choices, would react differently. So if people now understand, okay, they have been through this process of understanding about their situations, about their traumas, about the feelings that came with that, about the beliefs they have about themselves, and are now in the point of, okay, I'm forgiving myself, coming back into self-love again, if they ever had it, or come into self-love, how can they create like new beliefs about themselves, new behaviors? So what is the next step for them, for example?
That's a really good question. So identifying what we don't want is half the battle won.
Yeah,
so
but understand, if I go into a taxi and ask the taxi driver, please bring me away from here, it doesn't work.
To where?
Yeah, so we really need to understand where we want to go to. Otherwise, life is not moving and the taxi driver is not moving.
Yeah, but if a person's been stuck for a very long time in hearing themselves communicate toward themselves or speak to themselves in very self-abusive ways, to try and I ask sometimes people the question, if I could snap my fingers and all your problems were gone, how might life be? And sometimes people have said, I wouldn't know who I am, because they've identified their sense of self so much with their suffering that the thought of anything but that is so alien to them, they can't imagine a life without that at that point in time. But then after a little bit of work on identifying those habits and patterns that haven't been helping them, and then doing the work of beginning to let go of those habits, understanding the responsibility that we have in how we communicate toward ourselves, about ourselves. And then when we engage in the work of choosing to change literally what we're saying to ourselves, so we no longer communicate about the past as if it were the present or the future, then they begin to make some progress. Then at that point, I say to people, so if not that old stuff, the old negative communications, then what? What becomes possible from now? And then again, this is about developing a different relationship with our imagination. So if we're no longer wasting our energy imagining the worst, then what becomes possible? So for each individual, that's completely unique. We want to encourage that individual to begin to enter into a process of using their imagination in a way that may initially seem very, very, very different, because they're so used to being dragged around by their imagination into all kinds of nasty hypothetical situations. But if they've learned and have been practicing for a little while and are developing this new way of communicating, which has nothing to do with positive affirmations. This work, the dialogue of self-liberation, we don't focus in the slightest on positive affirmation. This is about the eradication of negative thinking, based on the principle that my teacher referred to in this way. He said, absence of darkness is light. It's not about trying to tell ourselves, I feel lighter or stronger, or I am courageous, or I am improving. Because all too often positive affirmations end up being nothing but lying to ourselves and hoping for the best. But if we're understanding that what we're actually doing is eradicating, clearing away any self-limiting or self-abusive context from the way we're communicating toward ourselves, about ourselves, in the present tense and the future tense, because we can't change the past, but in the present tense and the future tense, then all kinds of things become possible, because we slowly over time end up letting go of our attachment to those old past unhelpful patterns and habits and beliefs. And when we do this, it suddenly becomes more possible for us to use our imagination to work out what we would prefer instead. To entertain the idea, like for instance, if we've believed that we're a failure in relationships, but we no longer are telling ourselves that because we realize that doesn't make sense, then it opens up the possibility for that experience or that ability to imagine how things might be different. It allows us, space begins to open up. And within that space, we can begin to explore what I refer to as the maybe as yet unexplored territory of the good things that can come. Because we're no longer blocking the good stuff with these barriers that we put up in our imagination between ourselves and the good stuff. I did that for 20 years of my life, totally unconsciously. And then when I was helped to identify which kind of barriers I'd been putting up and no longer began to no longer communicate about them in the present tense or the future tense, I was no longer giving energy to them, so they dissolved naturally. And suddenly my life began to change on every level for the better. There's no limit to what we can, how transformational the experience can be once we've let go of, or we understand the process of continuously letting go of anything which is an example of a self-limiting or self-abusive self-communication or self-talk. When we no longer do that, it opens up all kinds of possibilities for new experience.
How do you see that if people at this point, they can, they let go of their blocking beliefs and about their bad self-talk, and now at this point to step into the kind of unknown field, because it's like, okay, we are opening the room for options and possibilities, but it's also like they're stepping into, not unknown, but also kind of not their comfort zone anymore. Because like suffering was their comfort zone for, even if it was not comfortable, but it was anyhow their comfort zone. They got used to that, and now they are standing on this bridge, like everything is possible with this letting go of the old blocking beliefs and stepping into the unknown, perhaps not even having a vision where to go to. How do people react in this certain kind of moment?
Differently, each person. But I refer to every client that I've ever worked with, I've said the same thing to about this, is that by choosing to engage in this kind of inner work, self-developmental work, by doing so, the person chooses to pursue the courageous path. It takes courage to look at ourselves in a transparently open and honest way. It takes courage to reflect upon our past failings or even current failings, our weaknesses, our frailties, our vulnerabilities. But one of the things, as I mentioned, I shared in common with Vernon was a love of martial arts. I've been practicing martial arts since I was about 17 years old. And I have a teacher, and one of the things my teacher said a number of years ago, just in passing, I've retained word for word what he said, because he really spoke to me on a very deep level about this work. He said, people think vulnerable means weak, but it isn't. To be vulnerable means that we are open, and being open is the goal of this work. And I would say, to add to that just a little, is that we need to understand that we need to be courageous to be open. We need to have the courage to be open and receptive, like a child when they're first born. They're so receptive. Everything's fascinating to them. And we lose that so much as adults because we get tarnished by the experiences. You know, we get put off of things and guarded and paranoid and blinkered and very self-protective, maybe overly protective, or push things away. But to be open and receptive is the goal of this work. In the present moment, in the now, because this is all we have. We're not living in the past, we're not in the future, we only have this. And so to be open and receptive and comfortable in ourselves, then another metaphor I use is that this work is about reclaiming control of the helm of our own ship, the helm of our own thinking, so we steer it wisely, our own self-talk, our own emotions and reactions. And so when we do this, it brings us into the present moment. And when we're in the present moment and we've reclaimed control of the helm of the ship, we have the ability to choose where we go from here. And even if that we're not familiar yet with the unexplored territory of no longer being a person who gives ourselves a hard time all the time, we need to be courageous and just begin to explore. There's a saying I love, which is slow and steady wins the race. It's not a rush, and it's not about being goal orientated. It's about understanding what the process is about. So the process makes absolute sense to us to continue to engage in a process of continually exploring who we can be from now, how life can be, what's possible for us, now that we're no longer limiting ourselves unnecessarily.
I think this is also very powerful, to be really in the present moment, because also this is like not only being in the past, we already spoke about that, but a lot of people are already in the future, like thinking, oh, what I have to do tomorrow, what I have to go shopping, what do I have to buy? And so they're kind of not in the present moment, and for that not seeing synchronicities that appear that they can pick up, or like signs they get or options they get, because they are not present. So I think this is also something that we really need to state, that this is important really to understand what is in the now. What can what kind of decisions can I make now when I'm really,
Absolutely. There was something you mentioned earlier as well that I really picked up on, which was that when people have been working on themselves for a while, then it gives us an opportunity to lead by example to others. You know, if we've been through some difficult things ourselves and have learned how to overcome those challenges, it gives us an insight, you know, it gives us an understanding and an empathy, a compassion for other people who may also be experiencing similar challenges. So in a number of cases, there are certain people I've worked with who have been through terrible traumatic experiences who become really inspirational people for others, guiding lights for others. And then it means that whatever we've been through in our past, it gives us an opportunity to take those experiences and turn them into something which is of real value when it comes to helping other people. you know, to lead by example, to pay it forward in a good way. The world needs more people like this, who've learned how to overcome unnecessary suffering. You know, when I say unnecessary, what I mean is giving ourselves unnecessary suffering, speaking to ourselves in harsh ways and learning how not to do that anymore. Then we, you know, when we've learned how not to be like that, we have the opportunity to help others to learn the same. How not to be like that toward themselves, how to become a friend, to befriend themselves in the way they speak to themselves, rather than be a bully toward themselves or an abuser.
Yeah, also this is something that you often see in like the genetic line, like hurt people hurt people. Yeah,
isn't it true?
Yeah, so a pattern that was created in a family generations back, you can see this coming up again and again, like violence or alcoholism or whatever. Yeah, so, and then being the one that breaks the pattern and creates another future for the upcoming generations. This is also very powerful.
Yes, absolutely, yes. So this is one of the reasons why I have great respect for, say, for instance, Alcoholics Anonymous and the people who successfully go through that program. It takes courage to stand up and say in the first meeting, hello, my name is, I'm an alcoholic, before anything else. And then the people who successfully work through the program and become mentors for other people have great respect for that, because they take all their past suffering and give it meaning and purpose, so they can help other people to raise themselves up out of similar suffering. I think we can all do this in very different ways. But it's a choice. We need to take a look at ourselves courageously and make the effort of doing the inner work. And with a little bit of help and guidance, we can achieve a great deal and do a lot of good along the way.
Yeah. If people are now inspired by what you told them and giving all this information, how can they reach out to you?
Thank you, Swanette. There's a website that I direct people to, which is learntdsl.com. TDSL stands for the Dialogue of Self-Liberation. So learntdsl.com. On the website, we have 3 different options where people can engage in the work. We have a couple of courses. One is an audio course, which is downloadable via an app to mobile phone. That's available on Android and on Apple devices as well. We have a live program which consists of it's a 5-week course with a live Zoom call once a week with a small group of people at the same time each week for 5 weeks. The course, both courses, the audio course and the live program, have written material in PDF form, which is drip fed once a week, or when they complete the audio course lesson 1, then they can access the next audio. We also have accompanying both courses audio material in the form of guided contemplations, what we refer to as guided contemplations, which are suggested spoken voice exercises to help the individual begin to communicate outwardly with their own voice in a self-supportive and unconditionally non-limiting way, not in terms of positive affirmation, but just in a non-limiting way. So they become used to hearing themselves speak in this particular way with the sound of their own voice, plus audio material, which is a selection of guided visualizations to help that person to review certain memories and transform how they choose to view the memory, what they do with it, and how to harness the creative power of the imagination. So we have those 2 courses, the audio course and the live program. Then there's an opportunity for people to work with me on a one-to-one basis as well, which I do with people via Zoom as we are having this conversation now.
Okay.
So
I will put the link to your website in the description so that people easily can click there and find the way and speak to you. So
That's great. Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity of speaking to you about this, Swanette. It's lovely to meet you.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving all the information and being so inspiring. And I'm sure a lot of people can find themselves in having this blocking beliefs and having bad self-talk. And I'm sure they will reach out to you. So thank you so much for being my guest today on my show.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay, see you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening or watching my podcast, Holistic Creators. If you want to know more about how I can help and support you, have a look at my website, spiritualchangemaker.com. You can also join my Facebook group, Spiritual Changemakers Community. Stay tuned for the next episode by subscribing to this channel. And you also can check the previous episodes.